Leave me alone!
Akira!
Hello, I'm Riotash. Happy Valentine's Day, or belated Valentine's Day depending on when you're watching this. Someone once told me that this book, Wuthering Heights, was one of the greatest romance novels of all time. I mean, fair enough, if you go to Goodreads and check up the greatest classic romances, you will quickly find that Wuthering Heights is quite high on that list. I don't know who this person is or what they are doing right now, but I hope they have gotten the extensive therapy that they need. Because if someone considers this the greatest romance, they're going to end up a statistic. Wuthering Heights is not a romance. I would argue it is the greatest anti-romance of all time. Love goes to die at Wuthering Heights like red blood cells at the spleen. Now, don't get it twisted. This is one of the greatest books of all time and my personal favorite classic, bar none. And I truly feel that you need to read it at least once in your life. Wuthering Heights is a very nihilistic view of a fairy tale romance. It is a deconstruction of a love story and not an example of it. When I say it's a haunting book, I both mean it in its literal and aesthetic sense. This is a book filled with misery, hate and vengeance, but also literal ghosts and apparitions. Like, it would be really freaking stupid if they made a high-budget movie on Wuthering Heights and called it the greatest romance of all time, right? Why is the shot not cutting? Well, at least they've had the sense to put quotation marks. Those things are doing some heavy lifting here. I have a working theory that they quite literally haven't read the book and just thought it was Pride and Prejudice 2 and this movie is just high-budget rage bait. But this movie isn't just a big oopsie daisy. It reinforces the idea that Wuthering Heights is a romance and people will come to the book expecting this, when in reality it's more like this. I mean, this assumption that Wuthering Heights is a romance is already present. There is a reason why the one-star reviews hate this book with more passion than 14-year-old me at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Like, just pause the video and look at these reviews, bro. They hate Wuthering Heights so much that, ironically, they would fit right into the cast of Wuthering Heights. Which begs the question, what is in this book that repulses them so much? That is the question we'll be trying to unpack today. But first, I'm going to go back inside because I think I've doubled my month's touch grass quota. Unlike most romances, Wuthering Heights starts off after the story has ended. You view the first chapter from the perspective of John Lockwood, or Mr. Lockwood as he's referred to in most of the novel. He walks to this old, lonely mansion to meet his new landlord. He describes the place as a misanthropist's heaven, a place that is perfect for people who don't like people. He thinks that he and his landlord will be kindred spirits. When Lockwood reaches the house, he sees a middle-aged man staring at him with his dark eyes. This is Heathcliff, his landlord. When Mr. Lockwood tries to introduce himself in good faith by mentioning that he is now occupying Thrushcross Grange, Heathcliff promptly replies, "Thrushcross Grange is my own, sir," he interrupted, wincing. "I should not allow anyone to inconvenience me if I could hinder it. Walk in." While this sentence may just seem like an odd thing to say, it perfectly represents Heathcliff's character. He has immense wealth, a mansion for himself, but he still feels the need to remind everyone what is his. Like he's afraid that if he doesn't, others will take it for themselves. In a way, it's kind of sad. This line is also an ominous foreshadowing of what's to come in the book. If anything inconveniences Heathcliff, then he will either conquer it or destroy it. There is no middle ground. Also remember the name Thrushcross Grange, because it'll be quite important for the rest of the novel. Lockwood was surprised by Heathcliff's rudeness. While not explicitly stated in the novel, it is implied that Lockwood is a very wealthy man, considering he can rent Thrushcross Grange, which is practically a mansion. He is a man who is accustomed to people treating him like a lord. But Lockwood also admits that he kinda likes being talked to like that.
What do you mean by that?
After Lockwood enters through the gate, we are introduced to a man named Joseph, as Heathcliff calls him to fetch some wine. Joseph is a very thin, sick-looking old man. The first words we hear from him are a whispered plea for God to save us. Lockwood thinks that he might need that divine aid to digest his dinner. I think that joke was probably hard in 1800s polite society, perhaps just as hard as Mr. Lockwood was for Heathcliff. We are then given some lore on the titular mansion of Wuthering Heights. It's called that because it's so far away from society and is exposed to a lot of storms and snow. It's described in such a unique way, like it's a living, breathing animal that is fighting to survive the hellish weather. Throughout the book, you will find that the ability, or more aptly the inability, to withstand strong emotions and weather the metaphorical storm will be very important. Even the small artistic detail on the door is described in the text as grotesque, even as Lockwood takes his time to admire the beauty of it. Lockwood then goes in and enters the living room. It's eerily dark in there. But the furniture is beautiful, almost homely. Lockwood could see the stuff belonging to a southern farmer sitting in his armchair drinking ale. But then he notices Heathcliff standing there, a contrast to all this beauty, almost as if he doesn't belong there. Then we finally get a description of Heathcliff. He's a dark-skinned in aspect. In dress and manners a gentleman. That is, as much a gentleman as many a country squire. Rather slovenly perhaps, yet not looking amiss with his negligence, because he has an erect and handsome figure, and rather morose. Possibly some people might suspect him of a degree of underbred pride. I have a sympathetic chord within that tells me it is nothing of the sort. I know by instinct his reserve springs from an aversion to showy displays of feeling, to manifestations of mutual kindliness. He love and hate equally under cover, and esteem it a species of impertinence to be loved or hated again. Heathcliff is not only an outsider in terms of his residence, but also his race. He is a brown or black man, we don't know. His race is ambiguous throughout the novel. The only thing we do know is that he isn't white like all the characters around him, isolating him even more. Like, you would have to not read the book to make him white. Lockwood, just purely based on appearance, assumes that he is a man who is an equal part capable of great love and equally great hate. Lockwood even chastises himself for assuming that so quickly and without basis. Emily Bronte does not glorify Lockwood for being of a higher station. In fact, there are many moments in this book where she mocks him for his naivety. However, throughout this book, you will quickly notice that Lockwood has this uncanny ability to judge a person's character accurately just by appearance alone. This is the first example. In a way, he's absolutely spot on about Heathcliff. He is capable of great love and great hate. This is where we get to learn a little bit about Lockwood and why he decided to come to Wuthering Heights. Some time ago, Lockwood was on a beach and he saw a woman he was infatuated with. A real goddess in my eye, he says in the text. But he always admired her from a distance, never confessing his love. But then came an opportunity where she told him that she liked him too. As soon as that happened, all the love he had for her suddenly faded, and he left her to go as far away from her as humanly possible. Mr. Lockwood even says that it was undeserved that he got a reputation for heartlessness for it. Clearly, this is a lie. Lockwood is unable to deal with another's love and backs away, running far away from her. But he's too soft to admit those feelings and blames it on a mysterious feeling, saying that others couldn't understand his pain. He then sits on the hearthstone waiting for Heathcliff to arrive. There, he spots a dog at his feet with two pups beside her. Being a little bored, he starts to make faces at them, and the dog starts leaping and nipping at him. Heathcliff and Joseph come in to ask what's going on. Lockwood is obviously pissed off about the dog jumping on him, and he says that if it had bitten him, he would have set his signet on it. Now a signet is one of those old-fashioned heavy rings that people used to wear, and when he says he would have set his signet on the dog, he basically means he would have whacked the dog with a ring. Let me explain to you how dumb this is. Imagine your neighbor's pit bull terrier named Princess Cupcake is running at you, right? And to fight it off, you whip out your Apple Watch. I mean, he's trying so hard to look tough and sophisticated, but it shows how out of his depth he clearly is. Lockwood, at the end of the day, is just an impulsive rich guy trying to run away from the world, not a person like Heathcliff who was made for a rough, desolate place like Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff, hearing this, starts smiling and brings him wine to calm him down, and apologizes for the dogs, saying guests are so very rare around here. Lockwood then leaves, deciding to visit tomorrow instead. Before returning to Wuthering Heights though, Lockwood spends some time near the fire studying. There he meets a matronly lady at Thrushcross Grange. This is Nellie Dean, arguably the most important character in the novel. We will get to her story in a few more chapters, but keep her name in mind. It was snowing the day he arrived at the gates of Wuthering Heights. He saw it was chain closed. Unable to remove the chain, he leaped over it and started banging on the door. It was getting colder by the minute, and at the end, he just resolved to hitting the door with all his might. In his head, he was begging for someone to just open it, which eventually turned into curses of pure rage, calling them wretched inmates. Although all this was done in his head, he's too gentlemanly to say all this out loud, of course. Eventually, though, Joseph appears and says this. You will quickly notice that every time Joseph speaks, you will have to start reading the book like this. He speaks in a heavy Yorkshire accent, so for convenience, I'll just translate what he's trying to say into modern English. See, what he's trying to say here is that, what do you want? The master is down in the sheepfold. Go around by the end of the barn if you want to speak to him. Lockwood asks if he could get in because it's really cold out here and it's only getting colder. Joseph says that the missus is the only one inside and he won't have anything to do with her, and then leaves. Eventually, a young, gruff-looking man, Hareton, opens the door and welcomes him in. There he sees the missus sitting on the couch. She's a young woman of 18 who is sitting in rags. Not exactly what you would expect from the wife of a gentleman like Heathcliff. Lockwood tries to make small talk with her, but she remains silent, annoyed at Lockwood for even talking to her. Then Heathcliff appears. He asks if he could stay at Wuthering Heights for a bit because the light snow had turned into a full-blown snowstorm, which is pretty typical of Wuthering Heights. Now remember this, Heathcliff has no reason to say no, but he denies Lockwood anyway, saying that if he wants to, he can weather the storm on his own. In the background, you can hear Hareton and the missus having an argument about if Lockwood is invited to tea. In the span of a few minutes, Lockwood has somehow made the missus hate his guts. Truly generational riz. Lockwood is then reluctantly given tea and, just as he always does, starts running his mouth again. He starts talking about how strange it is that Heathcliff can find happiness this far away from polite society, blah 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 blah. After a while of this, Lockwood says two words he shouldn't have. Amiable lady. My amiable lady, he interrupted, with an almost diabolical sneer on his face. Where is she, my amiable lady? Thankfully, Lockwood had enough sense to realize that this was a sore spot. The missus looks more like Heathcliff's daughter than his wife anyway. He then assumes that Hareton is Heathcliff's son and her husband. At this, Hareton turns red and clenches his fist. Heathcliff then tells Lockwood how her actual husband, Heathcliff's child, is dead. His name was Linton. Put a pin on this name because we'll get to him in about an hour. The name of the missus is Catherine Heathcliff. No, not this one, but another one. See, there are two Catherines in this book, so for convenience, I'll be calling her Cathy. He also says that Hareton is not his son. This seems to hurt Hareton, but Heathcliff seems to gain some sick sort of pleasure from this, a foreshadowing of what's to come. After eating, Lockwood asks if he could be given a guide if he can't get a room. Heathcliff ignores him and tells Hareton to go about some business in the farm. Joseph takes this opportunity to curse Cathy out. And I want you to observe this line. I'll translate it from Josephese so you can understand what he's actually saying. I wonder how you can manage to stand there in idleness and worse when all of them have gone out. But you are a good for nothing. And it's no use talking, you will never mend your bad ways, but go right to the devil like your mother before you. As I've already told you, this book is filled with awful people. And Joseph is nowhere near as bad as some of these characters. But he's one of the most hateable characters in the novel. He's a man that will use God to shame and defame whoever he does not like. He's a deeply religious man, but at the same time, he's willing to follow, almost worship, the most evil people. The more you read about Joseph, the more you realize that it's power that he worships, not righteousness, which is why he thrives in a place like Wuthering Heights. Right now, the man with the most power is Heathcliff, so Joseph is loyal to him. Joseph is a character that will be a constant theme throughout this novel. He was there when Heathcliff was young, and he's still there after the events of the novel, where everyone has either left Heathcliff or is dead. But Joseph refuses to leave throughout, staying to corrupt the next generation. What amazes me even more about Joseph is that not only does he create misery for others, but also himself. See, the only reason he said that he didn't want anything to do with Cathy at the gate is because he is convinced that she is a witch that can cast hexes on him. He makes a prison for himself because of his own superstitions. Case in point being this scene itself. After hearing Joseph curse her mom, Kathy says that she will hurt him badly with her curses if he does not leave. Hearing this, he quickly retreats. Lockwood sees her do this, but looking at her face, he thinks that she's not a bad person. This being his gut feeling, he asks her to please help him get back home. Kathy, seeing his earnestness, just says, "Take the road you came." She cannot escort him because they won't even let her walk to the garden walls. They won't even let her out, really. She's like a trapped bird sitting there, a trophy more than an actual human being. Knowing this makes Joseph's previous claim about her doing nothing even more ironic, because she's not allowed to do anything, but is also expected to contribute by doing something. The only thing she can really do is make tea. Lockwood then decides if no one is there to guide him, he must stay here. Hareton then parrots Heathcliff's words and says that a stranger is a stranger and cannot stay at Wuthering Heights. But Lockwood has had enough and walks past him. Hareton, then realizing that the dude might actually get lost and die, tells Heathcliff that he will go with him till the park. But Heathcliff again says no and tells him to look after the horses. Kathy interjects, saying that a man's life is worth more than horses, but Hareton heard his master's words and he cannot disobey. Lockwood then takes a lantern and starts the 4-mile walk back to Thrushcross Grange in the cold. Joseph screams that he's stealing the lantern and commands the dog to go hunt him down. The dogs immediately jump on him and Lockwood falls to the ground. Seeing all this mayhem, Heathcliff comes in and simply tells the dogs to stop biting him, and they obey. Zela, the only housemaid at the mansion, sees all this and scolds Hareton and asks him if they're just going to start killing guests at the very gates of this house. She then finally offers Lockwood a place to rest. While Zela takes Lockwood to the room, she suggests that they should move in the dark without a lantern. See, the room that she's giving to Lockwood is Heathcliff's, and he doesn't let anyone enter it. Lockwood is too stupefied to ask any questions, so he just follows her lead. When he enters the old dusty room, he sees some old books. Journals of somebody named Catherine. He notices that the name varies from Catherine Earnshaw to Catherine Heathcliff to Catherine Linton. Now, you know how this is none of Lockwood's business, right? How he could just, not touch all this stuff and not get into more trouble? You want to guess what he does? So after trying to rest for a few minutes, he started going through Catherine's journals. He goes from journal to find one he's interested in, but then he spots a drawing of Joseph, a little younger but still a musty old man. Lockwood decides that this is the one he will be reading. In the journal, Catherine describes missing her father, that Hindley, her older brother, would treat Heathcliff badly. Basically abuse the little guy. Since it was Sunday, they were supposed to go to church, but it was raining, so instead, Joseph commanded everyone to read their Bible, especially the young Heathcliff, Catherine, and some random ploughboy. In the evening when they were playing after Bible study, Hindley comes up and tells the ploughboy to pull at Heathcliff's hair because Heathcliff supposedly snapped his fingers at him. She also journals about a time when she was decorating the curtains in her free time, and Joseph comes in and tears it down, telling them to grieve because their father had just passed away some time ago. And then he gave them the Bible again. In their anger, Heathcliff and Catherine kick the book. And sensing the opportunity to hate, Joseph called Hindley to punish them. Then Catherine talks about how Hindley brutalized Heathcliff again and again. After reading this, Lockwood sets the book aside and attempts to sleep. But the title of a religious text he glanced at lingers in his mind. He drifts into a nightmare where he's trapped in a chapel where a sermon is going on. Lockwood gets bored and interrupts the service to denounce the priest, urging everyone to attack him. Instead, the mob turns on Lockwood, and soon the entire church descends into a brawl where everyone is fighting one another. This dream is a strange mirror of reality. Just as Catherine and Heathcliff rejected Joseph's religiousness, Lockwood also does the same in his sleep. It's like the very foundation of Wuthering Heights is built on rebellion against God, and Lockwood is finally becoming a part of it. Then suddenly he woke up in a wooden closet. As he reached out through a branch to get out through the window, he grasped at an ice-cold hand. A pale woman was standing there, almost see-through. Her name was Catherine Linton. In that moment, the question he asked himself was not why she was here or if she was really dead or not, but why she called herself Catherine Linton instead of Catherine Earnshaw. Before he could complete that thought, the ghost grabbed him by the wrist and she wouldn't let go. Now, remember how in the intro I told you this story was extremely violent for its time? Well, here's the scene. Be prepared. Lockwood pleaded with her to leave him alone. He then tried to wrestle away, but couldn't. So instead, he pulled her wrist into the broken glass pane and began to saw it off. Emily Bronte does not sugarcoat the details either. She describes the blood and the gore of the scene as he does this. In a final attempt of desperation, the ghost of Catherine Linton says that she has been here for 20 years and to please show some mercy and let her in. Before Lockwood could do anything else, however, she was gone. Lockwood was trying not to scream when he heard Heathcliff's voice call out if anybody was there. When Heathcliff asked him who let him in here, Lockwood immediately ratted on Zela, reasoning that she deserved it for putting him in this weird haunted room, and quickly gathered his clothes to leave. He said that this place is filled with ghosts and goblins. When Heathcliff asked what he meant by that, Lockwood snitched on himself by saying that he was going through Catherine's old volumes. Heathcliff, in his anger, cursed him and struck his own forehead in anger. As Lockwood left, he could hear Heathcliff crying out for Catherine and opening the window to let her in. But there was no sign of the ghost anymore. Lockwood felt pity for Heathcliff, even though he had been a brute to him, but didn't go back to say anything and simply slept. In the morning, there was the usual arguing between Heathcliff and Cathy, and Lockwood didn't even wait to eat breakfast or anything. He simply wanted to leave as fast as humanly possible. After telling Cathy off, Heathcliff decided to accompany Lockwood all the way to the snow path at Thrushcross Grange, but then stopped there and returned back to Wuthering Heights, leaving Lockwood to find the way all by himself. Considering the snow had masked the path and the fact that Lockwood had the survival skills of a cucumber, he lost his way many times before returning to Thrushcross Grange. There, we see Nellie Dean again. She brings Lockwood some supper and mentions that she has been working at Wuthering Heights for 18 years and knew the past of both Heathcliff and Catherine. Lockwood, very much interested in learning more about Wuthering Heights, and specifically more about the girl widow Cathy, he's a simp. He asked Nellie why Heathcliff, a man that clearly was wealthy, was living in the dark and broken down Wuthering Heights instead of Thrushcross Grange, a house that is kept in good order. Nellie agrees that Heathcliff is extremely wealthy and grows richer every year, although nobody knows where that wealth comes from or how he acquired it in the first place. I want you to put a pin on this. We'll come back to it much later. After a few minutes of conversation, Lockwood learns that the house that he is now inhabiting was once owned by the Lintons. And then he learns that the Lintons and the Earnshaws are very much like the royalty of the times, as in, well, your mother is also your auntie, and your father is also your uncle type of situation. Alabama. Cathy's late husband Linton was her cousin on her father's side, and Hareton Earnshaw is her cousin on her mother's side. He then asks if Nellie could tell him the entire history of the place, and she agrees. However, first she has to bring him some gruel because he has caught a cold being outside yesterday. She then sits down and begins her tale. From here on out, the entire story is narrated from the perspective of Nellie Dean. Lockwood is a perspective character throughout the book, but he's thrice removed from the actual events of the story. Lockwood's character basically takes a back seat throughout the novel from here. Yes, he has a few prominent scenes, but only right at the end of the book. The history that Nellie describes to Lockwood is the true story of Wuthering Heights and how it came to be what it is today. After all this build-up, Nellie starts her tale. It's ironic that a story of how it all went to hell started with an act of kindness. Mr. Earnshaw, one of the few likable characters in the novel, came back from a 3-day absence with a small boy who could barely speak. He named him Heathcliff. Now, Miss Earnshaw, being a person of her time, was not happy to see the color of the child's skin. She probably really enjoys wearing white and really pointy hats. The two Earnshaw siblings, Catherine and Hindley, also hated him because he was the reason their father couldn't bring home their gifts. The kids, being kids, however, were content just listening to their father's stories. Even Nellie Dean, who for all her flaws is truly a kind person, describes the child as an it. Heathcliff was a quiet kid who barely spoke and quickly became Mr. Earnshaw's favorite. Hindley, older than Heathcliff by 8 years or so, started hating Heathcliff with a passion, viewing him as a competitor to their father's affection. He took every opportunity to insult and belittle him, calling him a fatherless brat. Nellie understood Hindley's frustration, not really liking Heathcliff herself, viewing him as just extra work. But when Heathcliff got dangerously sick and Nellie had to care for him, she really did start loving Heathcliff like any other child she took care of. But then Nellie recalls her first odd memory of Heathcliff. When the siblings went to a fair to buy horses, Heathcliff picked the best looking horse. But then it fell ill. Heathcliff then asked if Hindley wanted to trade horses with him, telling him that if he doesn't, he'll tell father about how Hindley beat him. He still had a bruise on his shoulder to prove it. Hindley, being bigger, pushed Heathcliff down right next to the horse, hoping that the horse would stomp him to death. Nellie, witnessing all this, was rushing to him, but she noticed that Heathcliff didn't cry out, but calmly stood up and took his horse. He didn't even tell father about this. At the time, Nellie thought this was kindness, but knowing what she knows now, she admits that she was wrong. Sometime later, Mr. Earnshaw began to fall ill. His wife had already passed away, and now it seems like his turn was soon approaching. We are not told what the disease is, but it's clear that he was going to die soon. He became very irritable and anything would annoy him. During this time, he became even more protective of Heathcliff. I feel like Mr. Earnshaw was the only one who really loved Heathcliff for who he was. Nellie Dean says in the previous chapter that regardless of how much Mr. Earnshaw doted on Heathcliff, he never returned his affections. But that didn't deter him from still loving the kid like he was his own. Everyone around Heathcliff merely tolerated him. Even Nellie Dean, the closest thing Heathcliff has to a friend in the house, covers up for Hindley beating and abusing him. And in such a bleak novel as Wuthering Heights, it's truly beautiful to see such a kind father figure. But Nellie says that all the kindness shown to him was rich nourishment to the child's pride and black tempers. To get closer to God before Mr. Earnshaw dies, they call upon a religious man. Wait, is that Joseph? Even Nellie doesn't like Joseph. This is how she describes him. He was and is yet most likely the wearisomest self-righteous Pharisee that ever ransacked a Bible to rake the promises to himself and fling the curses to his neighbors. The weaker and frailer Mr. Earnshaw got, the more Joseph began to gain influence on him. Joseph made Mr. Earnshaw worry about what comes after death, if his soul is really going to be damned. Joseph would spend time with Mr. Earnshaw, telling him stories, blaming little Catherine and Heathcliff, who had become fast friends by then. There are many interpretations of why Joseph did this. Some people say that he just hates women, and knowing Joseph, that's probably true. But I think it's because he knew that Mr. Earnshaw's time was almost up and he better get in the good graces of Hindley, who was still at college during this time. I'm once again telling you that every problem in Wuthering Heights comes from this guy. See, the thing is, Catherine was really fond of Heathcliff. Nellie even says that the greatest punishment she could receive was being separated from Heathcliff. She was too young to understand why her father was becoming more annoyed by her mischief. Only when she would calm down and sit with her father on his bed would he say, "Why canst thou not always be a good lass, Cathy?" To which she would say something insensitive. Her father would get pissed again, but he couldn't stay angry at her for long. Mr. Earnshaw was loving and an amazing person, which is why it hurt so much when he died. It's only when he dies that we first get to see genuine emotion from Heathcliff. He is capable of love and he did love his father. He and Catherine were bawling their eyes out. Nellie too was in tears. Mr. Earnshaw, for all his flaws, was loved by everyone. Joseph takes his time to tell everyone that it's selfish to cry over him because he's in heaven. He then tells the crying Nellie to go out in the rain and bring the doctor. When Nellie came back, she saw that Catherine and Heathcliff still hadn't slept and were comforting each other. A little while later, Hindley returns from college to the funeral with a wife. Truly the best time to reveal this information to the family. Her name is Frances Earnshaw. Since both Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw were dead, Hindley is now the man of the house. Frances seemed to Nellie a whimsical lady, as everything seemed to delight her. Hindley wouldn't tell if her parents came from wealth, so she's probably from a poor household, but it didn't seem to matter to Hindley. He loved her. Nellie tells one of the most distinctive memories of Frances is her having a panic attack about dying. Nellie admits to Lockwood that she didn't much care about this because to her, this just looked like a random freakout and that we don't take to foreigners unless they take to us first. Frances, very much like her husband, hated Heathcliff's guts but tried to win the friendship of her sister-in-law, Catherine, by any means necessary. Presents, kisses, etc. But Catherine never seemed to care much about her. Hindley, in his 3 years in college, had grown. He was no longer a ruffian boy, but a man. In every other novel, this is where their personalities would get better. They would be kinder to their friends and families. I mean, you'd think the guy being a grown man now would have matured, right? but he simply got worse. As soon as Hindley realized that he had total power in the house now, he confined everyone to the kitchen and took the entire house for himself. And with his father not being there to stop him, he was ruthless with Heathcliff. Hindley stopped his education, threw him into the stables to take care of the horses. He took every opportunity to flog and hurt Heathcliff. The only reason Heathcliff could still read was because Catherine was secretly teaching him everything she learned. Now, this chapter of the story is the closest thing Wuthering Heights comes to being a true romance. Emily Bronte describes Heathcliff getting beaten until his arms ached, but he would forget the pain as soon as he was with Catherine. Even though Hindley was on a mission to make Heathcliff's life as miserable as humanly possible, he failed to monitor Catherine and Heathcliff sneaking off into the moors to play and have fun, and they would return before Hindley noticed. This, however, is Heathcliff at his happiest. And you know Heathcliff can't stay happy for long. So one day while they were playing, they got a little too close to this huge mansion 4 miles down Wuthering Heights. And Heathcliff comes back alone, without Catherine. Nellie obviously asks for an explanation, and this is what Heathcliff says. While they were both playing, they went across to their neighbors at Thrushcross Grange, the Lintons. Then they spied on the 2 Linton kids, Edgar and Isabella, through the window. Now keep these guys in mind because they will be important characters in the future. For now, they are just the Linton kids. The way Heathcliff describes them is really interesting. He's very condescending, talking about how much better he and Catherine were, that their bond was stronger. While this may seem relatively innocent, it is this thought that destroys all of them. He's truly in love with Catherine, which is why I think what happens through the next few chapters broke Heathcliff. Isabella and Edgar were fighting over who keeps a puppy, and because of the ruckus, they woke up their parents, Mr. and Miss Linton. The parents tried to calm down the kids, but spotted Heathcliff and Catherine. Thinking that they were robbers, they unleashed their bulldog on them. The bulldog then chases after them, and the kids start running. Heathcliff gets away, but the bulldog bites Catherine's ankles, and she gets hurt and falls down. The family then catches up and they realize that they had not caught robbers but 2 teenagers. Isabella, the little sister, comes up and says the most out-of-pocket thing about Heathcliff. "Frightful thing, put him in the cellar, Papa. He's exactly like the son of the fortune teller that has stole my tame pheasant, isn't he, Edgar?"
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no.
Then, seeing that Catherine was injured, Heathcliff was forced to return to Wuthering Heights without her. The Lintons promised that they will take good care of her wound. As soon as Heathcliff stopped speaking, Nellie told him that Hindley was going to beat him for this when he finds out. But he didn't. Hindley, knowing how much Heathcliff loves Catherine, gave him a crueler punishment. The next time he saw Catherine, if he spoke a word to her, he would be dismissed from the house. Catherine had to stay at Thrushcross Grange for 5 weeks to fully recover, and when she returned, she came back a lady. As soon as she returned though, she started searching for Heathcliff. Heathcliff had had it rough these 5 weeks. He was dirty and uncared for and really did look like a stable boy now. You could really see what time alone with Hindley had done to poor Heathcliff. Hindley had to call him out like he was a dog, and only then did he finally come to see Catherine. But she was happy to see him regardless of how dirty he was and embraced him. Catherine always had a way of being a little insensitive in the things she said, even when she was well-meaning. While she held Heathcliff in that moment, she said, "Why, how very black and cross you look, and how funny and grim. But that's because I'm used to Edgar and Isabella Linton. Well, Heathcliff, have you forgotten me?" Heathcliff had been waiting for this moment for so long. But now that she was here, he couldn't speak to her. And after that comment, he didn't want to speak to her. He was hurt and he told her that he wouldn't be laughed at like this, and then left, hiding away somewhere in the house after that. It was around Christmas time when all this was happening, and today was a day of extra celebration. Nellie made cakes and everyone in the house was in the Christmas spirit. However, Nellie didn't call Heathcliff for dinner. The Lintons did not want him near their children. But then she found Heathcliff where he always was, working in the stable. Nellie told him to hurry up and go eat food before anybody saw him, but he didn't come. Only after the others ate did he come to the kitchen, where Nellie told him that he had grieved Catherine. Heathcliff suddenly turned serious, asking if she was truly grieved. Seeing that Heathcliff still clearly cared and loved Catherine, Nellie told him to dress well for the dance and go to her. But Catherine was with the Linton kids, specifically with Edgar. Heathcliff said that even if he knocked Edgar down, it wouldn't change the fact that Edgar is richer and more handsome than him. It doesn't change the fact that Edgar is more white than him. Nellie, in one of the most wholesome scenes in this book, says that being dark-skinned doesn't mean that he's not handsome, and that maybe his father was the emperor of China and his mother was an Indian queen who was so rich they could buy both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange with a snap of their fingers. Nellie even says that Heathcliff is broader and stronger than Edgar. Heathcliff starts smiling hearing this. It's in moments like this when you still realize that he's an innocent boy who wants so badly to be loved. Nellie cleaned him up and he was looking fresh. As soon as Heathcliff walked into that room, we are quickly reminded that nothing good can happen in this book. Hindley walked in at the same time as Heathcliff walked out, smiling. And you know that ticked him off. So Hindley tells Heathcliff that both he and Nellie can't touch anything in the room and to basically get lost. Edgar then peeked in and seeing Heathcliff's long hair, said that it kinda looks like the hair of a colt. All the anger that Heathcliff has been subduing came flooding back, and he slammed a plate of hot apple pie into Edgar's face. Hindley then grabbed Heathcliff and took him into his room. Even though Edgar cried for a while, they soon recovered their good mood when the feast came. And when the time of the dance finally came, Catherine begged for Heathcliff to be released, but it was in vain. Eventually, Catherine snuck away from the party and went under the stairs where Heathcliff sat. And even though Nellie was not supposed to let this happen, she let them speak freely for the first time in 5 weeks. Eventually, Catherine dragged Heathcliff into the kitchen to eat some food, but Hindley had beaten him so badly that he could barely eat. While he was sitting on the stool, Heathcliff said this:
"I'm trying to settle how I shall pay Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait if I can only do it at last. I hope he will not die before I do."
Nellie, hearing this, tried to say that God would punish the wicked people that think that way and that he should forgive Hindley. But Heathcliff replied,
"No, God won't have the satisfaction that I shall."
On my first read-through of this book, I was completely on the side of Heathcliff at this point. I wanted to beat the brakes out of Hindley for what he was doing. But on the second read-through, this is the most ominous line in the story, because Heathcliff will remember every slight and pay it back tenfold. In the present, Nellie gets up, telling Lockwood that it's getting late and that he should get some rest. But Lockwood begs for her to tell more, at least for half an hour. He also suggests that Nellie had more part in the story than he originally thought. And he's absolutely correct. We are seeing the entire story through her perspective, and there are so many moments in here where Nellie could have done something but chose not to, directly leading to the events of the story. Nellie obliges Lockwood for some more time and sits down to tell her tale again. On a fine June day, Frances gave birth to the last Earnshaw as of now, Hareton Earnshaw. Yes, the very same from the beginning of the story. Nellie was told this by a barn girl, but she also mentioned that Frances was sick. Nellie rushed to Wuthering Heights to see the baby and saw Hindley pacing around. When she inquired about Frances' health, Hindley said that she would be fine and that the doctor might be wrong on something. For a week, Frances fought her best to survive, and Hindley was positive that she was getting better. But then she passed away, leaning on her husband's shoulder. Hareton was basically entirely under the care of Nellie now. Hindley only checked on his son to see if he was still alive. He cursed God for killing his wife, and he became more tyrannical than ever. It was like the only thing that tied him to any humanity was gone. The servants at Wuthering Heights couldn't deal with this anymore and left, all except for Nellie and Joseph. Nellie even thinks that the only reason Joseph stayed was because he could see the wickedness of Hindley grow and reprove it from the sidelines. Hindley took out all his frustrations on Heathcliff, but it didn't matter. Heathcliff took pleasure in seeing Hindley degrade himself, turning into an alcoholic that was drinking himself to an early grave. During the same time, Edgar was visiting Catherine. She had been keeping up with the Linton family ever since her stay there and was growing pretty close with Edgar. Nellie even says that Catherine was sure not to show her rough side to Edgar. That was only reserved for Heathcliff, who she could truly be herself with. It's clear that Catherine loved both Heathcliff and Edgar, but she wouldn't let them meet because even if they never outright admit it, they despise each other. Edgar probably still remembers the feeling of apple pie all over his face, and that's not a pleasant memory. So one day, Heathcliff confronted Catherine by saying that she spends a lot of time with Edgar these days. A little annoyed by this, Catherine said that Heathcliff never speaks when she's with him and that he's no companion at all. Heathcliff quietly left, obviously hurt by this. One of the days that Edgar was visiting, Nellie was cleaning. Catherine, wanting to look as classy as the Linton family, told Nellie to leave and that a servant should never be seen while there are guests at home. Catherine, thinking that Edgar couldn't see, pinched Nellie. Nellie, seeing this as an opportunity to embarrass Catherine and finally put the little brat in her place, called her out for pinching her. Catherine tried to deny this, but Nellie showed the purple bruise that had formed on her arm. At the same time, baby Hareton came in and called Catherine Wicked Aunt Kathy, which ticked off Catherine even more, and she grabbed the little kid by the shoulders and shook him violently. Edgar, seeing her true nature, was disgusted by this and started to leave, saying that he was ashamed of her and he would never come back here again. Nellie took little Hareton away when all this was happening, and she looked back through the window to see both of them talking. And she noticed Edgar's face. He was madly in love with her and couldn't see the ocean of red flags that is Catherine Earnshaw. But then they heard the footsteps of Hindley, and Edgar fled before he could catch him. Hindley came in drunk and saw Nellie trying to stow little Hareton away. Hindley then did the most rational thing he could do at this moment and threatened Nellie, who is basically his foster sister by the way, with a carving knife. He caught a hold of Nellie and pushed the knife between her teeth. After that, he turned his anger on Hareton, shouting that he deserved a flogging for not running to him to welcome him back. Hindley then proceeded to take his own child that he loves and went up the stairs and dropped him. He would have died if it were not for Heathcliff catching Hareton just in the nick of time. Hindley then came to his senses and then blamed Nellie for not taking the kid away from him, and then proceeded to drink more alcohol. Later that day, when Nellie was doing her work, Catherine came to her and told her that she was very unhappy. Nellie then replied with this.
A pity, observed I. You're hard to please, so many friends and so few cares, and yet can't make yourself content.
Pow!
Hearing this, Catherine said that after yesterday's incident with Edgar, she confessed her love to him and agreed to marry him. I assume this was the sound that played in Nellie's head after hearing this information. Nellie asked why Catherine loves Edgar, but she couldn't give a proper answer, only that she loves him. When Nellie asked the question again, Catherine said it will make her rich and the greatest lady of the land. Even if Heathcliff was dirty and poor, Catherine still loves him. But right now, it would degrade her to marry him. Throughout this entire conversation, Heathcliff had been in the background, listening silently. He only heard the words that it would degrade her to marry him before he silently got up and walked away from Wuthering Heights. Up until this point in the story, it's going like a typical romance of the time. The hero and the heroine have a rough childhood, and the hero, in hopes of winning the heart of the heroine, goes off on a journey to become a refined gentleman. I mean, think Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, who was a contemporary of the Brontes. That book follows this exact beat I just told you about. So you would expect that Wuthering Heights would follow the same pattern, right? Nope. Even though the book is not chapterized like this, I think this is where the first of the 3 phases of Wuthering Heights ends. This is the very moment that Wuthering Heights transforms from a love story to a generational revenge epic. The thing that broke Heathcliff wasn't Joseph's verbal tirade or Hindley's physical torture, but Catherine saying that he was so much below her in status that it would literally degrade her to marry him. Remember that not too long ago, Heathcliff was boasting to Nellie about how Catherine and he shared a stronger bond than the Lintons. But now, because of his status, because he was an outsider with nothing, Catherine chose Edgar over him. From here, the innocent child that had such a hard-fought life is gone, and something else replaces him. From here on out, it's like this creeping misfortune had infected the very soul of Wuthering Heights, seeping into the lives of everyone that steps into that house. But the true tragedy of this scene is that Heathcliff didn't fully hear Catherine's words. If he had, I don't think this story would have ended like it did. When Nellie told Catherine that she would hurt Heathcliff with this decision, Catherine said that she would rather die than forsake Heathcliff. Her real plan was using the money that she would earn by being Edgar's wife to help Heathcliff become a gentleman. Nellie told her that out of all the reasons that she had for marrying Edgar, this might be the worst one. Catherine paused for a second to think and said this.
What were the use of my creation if I were entirely contained here? My great miseries in this world have been Heathcliff's miseries, and I watched and felt each from the beginning. My great thought in living is himself. If all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. I should not seem a part of it. My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it. I am well aware, as winter changes the trees. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nellie, I am Heathcliff.
Out of all the quotes from Wuthering Heights, this is the quote that most people come to as the greatest. Emily Bronte is not here to answer what Catherine means by this, but it's clear that Catherine believes what they have is true love, that even if one goes to hell, the other would follow. After that, they soon realized that they could not find Heathcliff. Everyone just thought that he was hiding just as he always had when he was hurt, but they couldn't find him this time. It was a dark summer evening. Nellie tried to persuade Catherine to stop looking and that they would find him tomorrow, but she wouldn't stop. After midnight, a sudden storm appeared, something nobody could have predicted. Even though Wuthering Heights was always prone to storms, this summer storm was extremely violent. No human could survive it if they were outside. Catherine ran outside even in the storm to find Heathcliff, but he was well and truly gone, and she returned wet and cold. The next morning, when Hindley returned for breakfast from his daily bender, they realized that Catherine was extremely sick. Catherine burst into tears and told Hindley that now he wouldn't get an opportunity to hurt Heathcliff anymore because he might already be dead. Catherine's illness got worse as the weeks went on, and Nellie had to nurse her through all of it. The Lintons, hearing about Catherine's worsening condition, took her to Thrushcross Grange for better treatment. But Mr. and Miss Linton would be the first of Wuthering Heights victims, catching Catherine's illness and dying a few days later. After a while, Catherine returned to Wuthering Heights, now Catherine Linton. She had married Edgar in the little time they were at Thrushcross Grange. Edgar saw his parents die and thought that this would be the perfect time to marry. Nellie was then ordered to Thrushcross Grange to serve as their nurse, but she was reluctant to go. Little Hareton was just starting to learn his letters and he needed her. Sadly, she's just a nurse and the Lintons are the royalty of the Moors. She was forced to leave with them. In the present, Nellie looks at the clock and realizes it is past midnight, and even though Lockwood wants her to continue, she orders him to rest and goes away. Now, since this was 1800s Europe, the concept of washing hands was still revolutionary, so everybody was falling sick. Lockwood's illness still hasn't receded and he has been tossing and turning in his bed for a few weeks. Heathcliff has come to visit him a few times and this really improved Lockwood's opinion of him. Just like the first time reader, Lockwood calls Heathcliff and Catherine the hero and heroine of the story, and he wants to learn more about them. Emily Bronte knew exactly what she was doing when she made Lockwood say this. She's reinforcing the idea that the story would follow the classic formula of a romance story. This isn't even me pulling things out of nowhere. Lockwood literally wonders if Heathcliff would come back a gentleman. She's playing with the reader, and it's genuinely brilliant. When Nellie came to Thrushcross Grange, she noticed Catherine was behaving really well. As the years passed, Nellie thought that Catherine had finally gotten over Heathcliff and found peace. Isabella and Edgar doting on Catherine, treating her like a queen, also helped the situation. However, one dusky September evening, when Nellie was sitting on the steps of the kitchen, she heard,
Nellie, is that you?
The voice had grown deeper, but the way he pronounced the name Nellie was familiar to her. It was Heathcliff. But unlike the long-haired, dirty, poor brute that he had been before, he had transformed into a gentleman. If Nellie didn't know him, she would think that he really was a prince. At Heathcliff's insistence, Nellie went into the room and called Catherine, telling her that a stranger was waiting for her outside. But as soon as she left the room, Nellie turned into 6'9" and snitched on Heathcliff by telling Edgar who the stranger really was. Edgar was not exactly happy to hear that his old rival had come back, and that too looking like a gentleman worthy of Catherine. Catherine returned ecstatic to find Heathcliff alive and thriving, and she invited him into the parlor for some tea. When Edgar tried to protest, Catherine begged him to put aside their differences and just be friends for her sake. Just as she was about to dart off again, Linton caught a hold of her and said,
Catherine, try to be glad without being absurd. The whole household need not witness the sight of your welcoming a runaway servant as a brother.
Heathcliff then entered the parlor to see the scene, and sensing the opportunity, Catherine took both Heathcliff's and Linton's hands and crushed them into a handshake. Edgar was surprised by how much the guy had changed. There were no signs of degradation or scars from Hindley's abuse, And even though the way he pronounced things stayed the same, his way of speaking was now civilized. Linton relented and asked him to take a seat. And Catherine asked if Heathcliff ever thought of her when he was away. And Heathcliff broke into this soliloquy, talking about how he thought of her every single day and that he had been waiting to see her and to touch her. Literally everything short of just confessing his undying love right then and there. Linton was rightfully pissed off at a random dude that bullied him suddenly rizzing up his wife and interrupted them, saying that their tea is now cold. Heathcliff then got to the point and said the reason he came was not just to see Catherine, but because Hindley had invited him. That he had come to settle at Wuthering Heights with Hindley. And then he said his goodbyes and started his journey to Wuthering Heights. Nellie was amazed by this. The fact that Hindley, the man who hated Heathcliff with every fiber of his being, had invited him. But still, she was suspicious of Heathcliff, wondering what he was up to. That night, Catherine came to talk to Nellie about Heathcliff. She was so happy to have him back that she had reconciled with God, promising that if she could make Heathcliff and Linton make up, she would behave like an angel. Time passed and Heathcliff visited Thrushcross Grange semi-regularly. But Isabella was suddenly getting agitated that Catherine was spending a lot of time with Heathcliff and not giving her a chance to spend time with Heathcliff instead. It became quite obvious that Isabella had developed a one-sided love for Heathcliff. Nellie warned Isabella that Heathcliff was not how he appeared and she should be careful with her love. But Isabella was head over heels for him. One day when Linton was gone, Heathcliff came to visit. Catherine and Isabella were sitting together, not in the best of terms. When Heathcliff entered, Catherine, just to spite Isabella, told Heathcliff about Isabella's crush on him. She really amped up the drama and made fun of her, telling Heathcliff that Isabella claimed her love for Heathcliff was more than Catherine's for Edgar. Isabella was embarrassed by this and tried to say it wasn't true, but Catherine kept on making fun of her. Eventually, they literally started fighting and Isabella nicked Catherine with her sharp nails. Catherine, in a way mirroring what Nellie did to her all those years ago, told Heathcliff to look at what she would do to him if they got married. Heathcliff then became an alpha male podcaster and said that he would wrench her nails off and beat her black and blue if she ever did anything like that to him. When Isabella left the room out of embarrassment, Heathcliff mentions that he could use Isabella to own Thrushcross Grange one day. But they dismissed the idea. One day, while Nellie was walking outside, she saw a pale child out on the moors. She thought it was the ghost of Hindley as a child. Even though she was terrified, she went after it in classic horror movie fashion. She suddenly felt a yearning to be at Wuthering Heights. Following the ghost, she reached there and realized that the kid was Hareton, a little more grown up now, maybe 5 years old. Nellie, being the one who nursed him through his early life, called out to him, praying that the gentle kid still remembered her. But instead, Hareton threw rocks at her and cursed her out. When Nellie took the rocks away and asked who he learned this from, Hareton said that it was Heathcliff who was teaching him all this. Apparently, Heathcliff had cut off his education too, doing to Hindley's child what Hindley had done to him. Heathcliff suddenly appeared at the doorway to Wuthering Heights, and even though he was now more civilized and gentlemanly, for the first time in the novel, Nellie feared him and ran away. A little later, Heathcliff showed up at Thrushcross Grange and Nellie spotted him hugging Isabella Linton. Nellie, knowing what he was up to, screamed traitor, and Catherine rushed there hearing her and silenced Nellie. Catherine told Heathcliff that if he didn't leave Isabella alone, then Edgar might just shoot him. But Heathcliff just smiled and prayed that he would even try to do something like that. They fought over it and Heathcliff in his anger said,
I have a right to kiss her if she chooses, and you have no right to object. I am not your husband. You needn't be jealous of me.
Catherine told Heathcliff that if he truly did love Isabella, then he would marry her, but she was certain he didn't. While all this was happening, Nellie ran to Edgar to tell him what was happening with the three of them having this weird Alabama love triangle that was going on. Edgar went downstairs to kick Heathcliff out of the house, saying that even if it was Catherine who begged him to be friends, he couldn't tolerate a fiend such as Heathcliff. Which is pretty fair. This led to a confrontation where Edgar whipped out the hardest 1800s English insults known to man. Heathcliff started sizing him up and started walking towards him, but Edgar did not want a physical altercation. Catherine took Heathcliff's side and said if Edgar didn't have the courage to attack, then he should apologize and leave. She then locked the room, and when Edgar tried to take the key back, she threw it into the fire. I am Telling you guys, Catherine is the wrong kind of crazy. So now Edgar was truly trapped, and that too with a hulking brute that is Heathcliff, who was bigger and stronger than him, with his own wife taking the other man's side, hoping that Heathcliff would flog him. Catherine and Heathcliff insulted Edgar even more, and Heathcliff came closer and pushed Linton. And in one of the coldest moments I've read in classic literature, Edgar sprang up and punched Heathcliff in the throat, knocking the wind out of him. And then he walked through the back door. Man, I didn't like Edgar much in the beginning, but when I read this scene, I was hitting the yeah, baby! Heathcliff has had this coming for so long now, and finally we get to see some justice in the world. Catherine, seeing Heathcliff beaten, told him to run because Edgar was about to spin the block with the guns. Heathcliff left and Catherine threw a fit. She told Nellie that she felt seriously ill and to tell Edgar that. She hoped to scare Edgar when he returned. Nellie, seeing the people that Catherine and Heathcliff have become, went to Edgar and told him what Catherine was doing, that she might not truly be sick, but just doing it to manipulate him. Edgar came to Catherine and asked her who she would choose, either him or Heathcliff. But Catherine couldn't answer. Edgar, seeing that his own wife couldn't answer this question, busied himself in the library, not noticing that Catherine wasn't eating and that she had locked herself away in her room. Nellie, of course, didn't mind it, thinking it was proper retribution for the fact that she couldn't choose between her husband and Heathcliff, whom she calls a worthless suitor. Let's take a minute to talk about this chapter. It's clear that the love Heathcliff and Catherine had when they were children were morphing into an obsession. It clearly had not waned with time. In fact, it had gotten stronger, to the point that Catherine is literally willing to betray her husband. You know what I've noticed? When people critique Wuthering Heights, they talk about Catherine and Heathcliff's love, but very rarely about Catherine alone. Catherine is a character that is a product of the environment she was raised in. She's someone whose bad nature was allowed to grow because of the people around her. Deeply selfish character. The only time she's not is with Heathcliff, and even then it's only because she wants Heathcliff all for herself. You could argue that Heathcliff is the way he is because of the pain he endured in his childhood. But what is Catherine's excuse? Whenever I think of this, I keep coming back to this one line. I am Heathcliff. It's like whether we like them or not, Heathcliff and Catherine are truly perfect for each other. They're the only ones that would deserve a partner as bad as each other. Edgar Linton, a kind man who faces tragedy with grace, deserves someone better than Catherine. Edgar and Catherine didn't talk for some time, ever since the fight over Heathcliff. Edgar still walked around in the library and Catherine was still locked away in her bedroom, not eating. After seeing all the drama that these rich people get into, Nellie was convinced that the only person in that house that had a brain was her. After some time, Catherine finally asked Nellie for some food, but then she quickly changed her mind solely because she thought Edgar wouldn't care enough. This was because Nellie, thinking that this was all an elaborate act by Catherine to manipulate Edgar, underplayed Edgar's concern for her. In reality, as soon as they stopped fighting, Edgar was panicking over a drop of blood on Catherine's lips. Nellie told Catherine that Edgar was completely fine with her just being stuck there and not eating. Desperate, Catherine told Nellie to convince Edgar that she was in danger of starving herself, but Nellie refused. So, thinking that Edgar was still indifferent to her suffering, her madness increased. One day when she was shivering, she asked Nellie to open the window. When Nellie refused, she ripped open a pillow in frustration, which reminded her of a childhood memory. When she stared at a mirror, she couldn't recognize herself anymore. She was no longer Catherine. She said that after the fight, she lost a few years and returned to the girl that lost Heathcliff, that she's the wife of a stranger. She again begged for the window to be opened, saying that she must go out, that something is calling out to her. Even after seeing all this, Nellie still believed that this was her attempt to gain sympathy from Edgar and didn't believe her madness. Catherine told Nellie that she and Heathcliff used to play in the graveyard asking for ghosts to come to them, and now it appears that they have. Edgar, hearing the commotion, entered the bedroom and immediately realized that Nellie had been downplaying her illness and Catherine's condition was much worse than he first thought. He rushed to her, and while Edgar held Catherine, she told him that she didn't want to be with him and that she would be dead by springtime, that he couldn't keep her from her real home, her resting place. Distressed, Edgar blamed Nellie for Catherine's madness. Even though Catherine was delirious, she was still conscious enough to understand that Nellie had been lying to her and she cursed her and called her a witch. After the doctor checks up on Catherine, he said that she'll be fine as long as she's kept in a state of tranquility. Amidst all this, one maid came running down from Isabella's room saying that she's missing. Heathcliff had taken her. Even though Nellie knew that Isabella was gone, she did her duty and checked and confirmed that she was gone. When Nellie asked if they should take measures to bring her back, Edgar said that she went out of her own free will and that she is no longer her sister, practically disowning Isabella. For 2 months, nobody heard anything from Heathcliff and Isabella. Catherine was well tended to by Edgar, and she soon recovered from the worst of her brain fever. Now, this isn't made clear in the novel, but this is about the time that Catherine became pregnant with Edgar's child. I'm telling you this now because in 2 chapters, they just have a kid, and I'm like, wait, she was pregnant? Which is why I'm here to tell you that yes, she is pregnant. But something had changed with Catherine. It seemed as if her sickness had given her knowledge of the future because she said these cryptic, otherworldly things. But Edgar didn't care. He was just happy to have his wife back. After a few weeks, Nellie received a letter from Isabella, where she revealed that she had been at Wuthering Heights with Heathcliff. It's clear from the letter that the charm of Heathcliff had worn off and Isabella could finally see him for what he truly is. She asked Nellie if he's a man or a devil. Isabella, so used to being treated as a princess at Thrushcross Grange, was shown the rough side of Wuthering Heights. Hareton, who had grown a little bit more by then, threatened to unleash the dogs at her. Notice the continuing motif of dogs not reacting well to strangers, especially those that are of a higher class than them. In a way, the dogs are like Heathcliff, this rabid animal that bites and tears at anything that he perceives to be higher than him. Also, to everybody's disappointment, Joseph also makes a return here. Joseph gives Isabella dirty oatmeal for the hunger and a torch for the light. Since there was no one, not even a servant, to help her, she wandered the dark mansion until she saw a man with long and shaggy hair. This was Hindley. It's never told to us what Heathcliff did to Hindley, even if he did anything at all, because he didn't seem physically hurt. However, the same cannot be said about his mind. He seemed more broken than when we had previously seen him, although without the strength to act out his anger. Isabella asked to find Heathcliff's room and Hindley showed it to her. Hindley also showed her his pistol, handcrafted from the springs found in the house. He tells her that every night he stands outside Heathcliff's room with that pistol, thinking about just going in and shooting him. But every night, without fail, the door was locked. I think what Heathcliff did to Hindley to settle the score from all those years ago was nothing. You remember in the first phase when he asked why Hindley didn't just drink himself to death? Well, Heathcliff gave him ample opportunity to do just that, slowly torturing him with his presence. Isabella then held the pistol. She was shocked by how powerful it made her feel. She had never felt anything like this before. Seeing this, Hindley snatched it back, suddenly jealous of her. Isabella then went to the kitchen and saw how these people lived. Even though they reside in a mansion, they live like beasts. When Joseph put the uncooked, dirty oatmeal in front of Isabella, she rebelled and knocked it over. Joseph then backed off, doing nothing, hoping that Heathcliff would see this and beat her senseless. But then the dog, Throttler it was named, came into the room staring at Isabella. But instead of attacking her, he simply licked the oats from the floor happily. Isabella then asked Joseph where she should sleep, but Joseph told her that there was nowhere to sleep and that the barn was the only place that she could go. Heathcliff kept his room locked at all times, so that was out of the question too. So Isabella, desperate, slept on the chair by the fire. Later that night, she was woken by Heathcliff. And she was angry at him. Why didn't he let her sleep in their bedroom? Why didn't he unlock it if he was gone for so long? While Isabella was talking, Heathcliff absolutely loses it hearing the word our room. He said that it is not our room and never will be our room to share. And the final words of the letter read,
I do hate him. I am wretched. I have been a fool.
A little while later, Nellie visited Isabella at Wuthering Heights. Through her letters, Isabella had asked Edgar to send a letter begging him to forgive her. When Nellie asked him about it, he said that he was not angry, but sorry for her. But he still never wanted to see her again. When she finally did arrive at Wuthering Heights, the whole place seemed indecent and broken down. The only thing that seemed to look alive was, ironically, Heathcliff, who looked like a born and bred gentleman. But his wife, Isabella, sat there in dirty rags like a slattern. Nellie told Heathcliff that Catherine, even though she had just recovered, was never going to be the same. That she had changed. That she was now only a fragment of herself. The only way Edgar sustains his love for her is the remembrance of what she once was. and a sense of duty. Heathcliff tried to appear calm, but the rage pushed through just a little. He was angry that Edgar didn't seem to have the same love for her that he once had, and asked Nellie if she thinks that he would leave Catherine to his sense of duty and humanity. Heathcliff decided that even though he was basically banned from ever visiting Thrushcross Grange again, he would once again visit Catherine. Nellie, of course, protested, saying that Catherine was just recovering and seeing him would actually kill her. She seemed to have realized that Catherine and Heathcliff, through their love, bring out the worst in each other. And regardless of their differences, Nellie is basically Catherine's older sister and cares for her. Heathcliff asked if Catherine would be upset if he took extreme measures to visit her then, not so subtly hinting that he would hurt Edgar. Heathcliff still remembered that punch Edgar gave him in the throat and probably wanted to settle the score. And Heathcliff, being cunning and cruel as he always is, probably already had the best way to torture Edgar in mind. But Heathcliff said that he wouldn't harm Edgar as long as Catherine wanted to be with him. And that is a promise he would keep. Nellie tried to dissuade another round of Heathcliff visiting Thrushcross Grange by telling him that Catherine had forgotten all about him, and instead of being angered, Heathcliff just laughed.
For every thought she spends on Linton, she spends 1,000 on me.
As much as Nellie wanted to deny it, she also probably knew that this was true. Catherine was only capable of loving Heathcliff. Isabella then heard this and told Heathcliff not to speak of her brother this way. But Heathcliff reminded her that this was the same brother who let her sit here in misery while he was just 4 miles away. That if Edgar wanted to, he could have come to Wuthering Heights and taken her. Nellie told Heathcliff that he was cruel for tricking Isabella into marrying him and that he should treat her better. But Heathcliff said that she knew what she was getting into and that she had an innate admiration for his brutality. Isabella eventually went upstairs and Heathcliff used this opportunity to tell Nellie to sneak a letter to Catherine and to arrange a visit to Thrushcross Grange. And if she didn't, Heathcliff would fight his way there. So when Edgar was at church, Nellie gave Catherine Heathcliff's letter. The way that Catherine is described here is almost ethereal. Catherine was just sitting there looking out through the window in her white, silky, flowing dress. It seemed as if she was becoming more and more of a ghost day by day. Before Catherine could even read the letter, Heathcliff marched into Thrushcross Grange, not trusting Nellie. When he entered and looked at Catherine, he immediately knew that Catherine was dying. He was sure of it, and they hugged and kissed each other, crying in each other's arms. Catherine said that he and Edgar had broken her heart and that was the reason she was dying. She didn't let him go, wanting to hold him until they were both dead. Nellie was in the corner as she always was in these scenarios, watching. Catherine was convinced that because of her actions she was exiled from heaven, and Nellie saw this as fitting. Catherine then saw Nellie in the room and lashed out at her, not with her usual violent, abusive language, but with a warning. Catherine told her that she felt bad for her because she knew what would happen next. In all the excitement, she tried to get up but started convulsing and fell back down. Heathcliff held her and told her that she was cruel for leaving him, that she betrayed her own heart. He truly believed that nothing, not even God or Satan, could have parted them. But here she was, leaving him in a place that he didn't belong. Catherine told him to leave her alone and that she was dying for her sins. She said that she had forgiven Heathcliff for everything and begged him to forgive her too. Heathcliff said that he could forgive her for anything, even murdering him, but he couldn't forgive her for dying. Catherine was still hanging on to Heathcliff, but Nellie realized that Edgar would be back soon. But Catherine warned him that if he left now, this would be the last time he would ever see her alive, which would turn out to be true. At midnight that night, Catherine gave birth to a small baby girl, only pregnant for 7 months or so. Only 2 hours later, Catherine died, leaving Edgar without a male heir. Edgar named his daughter Catherine after her mother, but I'll be calling her Kathy. Yes, the same one from the prologue. We'll get to it. Nellie then looked at Catherine's dead body, and this is how she described her.
Her brow smooth, her lids closed, her lips wearing the expression of a smile. No angel in heaven could be more beautiful than she appeared, and I partook of the infinite calm in which she lay. My mind was never in a holier frame than while I gazed on that untroubled image of divine rest.
Edgar, still holding his child, sank into mourning. Nellie then went outside of Thrushcross Grange, knowing who would be waiting there. Heathcliff stood there, and before Nellie even said anything, he already knew that Catherine was dead. Nellie began to cry for Heathcliff, thinking that this was God's way of punishing him for his pride. She told him how Catherine had died, and Heathcliff, in his pain, began to bash his head against a tree and begged Catherine's spirit to haunt him and not leave him behind. What surprises me is that when Nellie saw this, her compassion was not moved. She even tells Lockwood that it appalled her to see this. It was only when Heathcliff was quiet that Nellie actually cried for him, perhaps reminded of the innocent young boy who was so unfairly treated in Wuthering Heights. Nellie, seeing Heathcliff grieve, told him that she would help him sneak into Thrushcross Grange to see her corpse. But Nellie soon discovered that he had already snuck in and replaced Edgar's lock of hair in Catherine's locket with his own. Catherine was not buried with her family or that of the Lintons. Instead, she was buried on a green slope in the kirkyard, locked in peaceful solitude. Sometime later, when Nellie was peacefully working, she saw a pregnant Isabella come to her. She was bleeding from her neck a little, and while Nellie was bandaging her, she told her that it was from Heathcliff throwing a knife at her. Even though Isabella was hurt, she looked extremely happy, even excited to be out of Wuthering Heights. She told Nellie that at Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff mourned Catherine by praying, but she said that Heathcliff confuses God for the devil. Isabella then tells the story of how she got away. One night, she was sitting in the parlor with a drunk and angry Hindley when Heathcliff returned. Hindley, sensing an opportunity to get revenge, locked Heathcliff out of the house while he furiously banged on the door. He then asked Isabella if she was willing to help him kill Heathcliff, saying that they both had a right to get revenge on him. To rile her up, Hindley even asked if she was as soft as her brother, which I don't know what he's talking about. Edgar has the most aura out of everyone in this book. But Isabella refused. Then they engaged in what I can only describe as a philosophical discussion while Heathcliff angrily pounded away at the door. Isabella said that violence is a double-bladed spear. If they inflict it on others, then they will get their comeuppance. But Hindley said this:
"Treachery and violence are just a return for treachery and violence."
In my opinion, this quote is the main theme of Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff essentially is a giant mirror of what was done to him. The pain that Hindley caused him is just reflected back into the world in the form of the monster that is Heathcliff. Hindley, understanding that Isabella wouldn't budge, simply asked her that if you were to kill Heathcliff now, would she hold her tongue? For however much we can dislike Isabella for being an annoying and naive character, she still stuck by her values and said that she wouldn't hold her tongue, even warning Heathcliff. This is not to say that Isabella still loved Heathcliff. Oh no, she hated his guts. In fact, she thought how wonderful it would be if Hindley and Heathcliff just killed each other right now. Hindley used this as an opportunity to stick out his gun and shoot Heathcliff. But Heathcliff grabbed it and the shot hit Hindley's arm instead. Heathcliff then smashed through the glass of the door and started beating Hindley. The way this beating is described in the novel is so relentless. Like, even when Hindley is said to be half dead, Heathcliff wouldn't stop kicking and beating him. After a long time of just endless kicking, Heathcliff crouched and bandaged Hindley's wound to make sure that he was not dead. The next morning, Hindley woke up, his body beaten and battered. Isabella told him what happened because he literally couldn't remember yesterday's events. That night, it was the usual routine again. Heathcliff walking around the house, sulking over Catherine's death, and Isabella throwing insults at him. She had done this so many times that Heathcliff would just ignore it instead of beating her. Today, he was sitting across from her, in the corner of a dark room, when Isabella said,
"I recollect how happy we were, how happy Catherine was before he came. I'm fit to curse the day."
I think Heathcliff knew this was true. Catherine was finally falling in love and being happy with Edgar before he came back and ruined everything. When Isabella said this, he saw red and told her to get out of his sight before he stamped her to death. But Isabella just continued talking about Catherine.
"I beg your pardon," I replied, "but I loved Catherine too, and her brother requires attendance, which, for her sake, I shall supply. Now that she's dead, I see in her Hindley. Hindley has exactly her eyes, if you had not tried to gouge them out and made them black and red."
Heathcliff, hearing this, took a knife in his hands and flung it at her. But luckily, it only grazed the back of her neck. and was nothing fatal. Then he started toward her. Isabella, realizing that Heathcliff was actually going to kill her this time, started running away. And to everyone's surprise, Hindley played the hero and blocked Heathcliff from chasing her. Isabella then said goodbye to Wuthering Heights forever and fled. After telling Nellie this story, she kissed Edgar and Catherine's portraits and left Gimmerton, eventually settling south of London. Isabella then had her child and named him Linton, after her family, and raised him all by herself. Heathcliff said that he had plans for Isabella.
When I wanted, they may reckon on that.
But that day never came, because Isabella died when Linton was only 12, and she never saw Heathcliff again. Considering what this book is, this counts as a happy ending. But her brother's story, however, is a little sadder. After his wife's death, Edgar became a hermit, but he took care of his daughter with all the love in the world. Nellie thought about how Hindley and Edgar had both lost their wives when they had their children, but how different they both were. Nellie said that regardless of how soft and weak people consider Edgar, he is the only one that showed true courage and loyalty. 6 months after Cathy was born and Isabella fled, Hindley mysteriously passed away. There was no sign of a struggle, and maybe it was the alcohol that killed him, but I think we can all agree that it was actually Heathcliff who finally put his old rival to rest. He had a new plan now. New goals, new people to pay back his debts to. This is where, in my opinion, the second phase of Wuthering Heights ends. It's more apt to say that this is where any pretense of it being a love story ends. Emily Bronte literally kills the main love interest off. From here on out, it's a story of methodical revenge, Heathcliff settling scores with people both alive and dead. We have a 12-year time skip into the future, and now we are following Cathy, the daughter of Edgar and Catherine, who is now about 13 years old. Cathy was nothing like her mother in both appearance and in personality. She looked more like a Linton than an Earnshaw, inheriting her father's looks. She was mild-mannered and soft, unlike her mother who was more prone to outbursts of rage. I think out of all the characters in Wuthering Heights, she's one of the few characters that is truly morally good, to the point where she feels almost out of place in the novel. It's like if a Disney princess was suddenly dropped into a Game of Thrones. It isn't going to end well. Cathy is also extremely pure and naive, a trait that a man like Heathcliff can so easily manipulate. One day, Edgar was sitting in the house and he received a letter from Isabella. She was dying and wanted Edgar to come to London to say goodbye and take her son Linton as his own. Edgar, realizing that it was time to put the past behind him, went to meet his sister. Cathy took this opportunity to explore beyond Thrushcross Grange for the first time in her life. She jumped onto her pony and went exploring with Nellie following after her. After some time, Nellie realized that she couldn't find Cathy anymore and began frantically searching for her. She eventually found her talking to a tall, gruff-looking boy and a servant at Wuthering Heights. She realized that the boy was Hareton, now 18 years old, and Zila, the new servant at Wuthering Heights. Nellie, realizing how bad this is, tried to drag Cathy away from the place, but she was having a lot of fun talking to Hareton and Zila, so she wouldn't budge. They talked about a lot of things, including the history of the mansion and Heathcliff, the current owner. In the conversation, Cathy found out that Hareton was not Heathcliff's son, but his servant, and she began to get embarrassed for talking to him so casually. She then ordered him to fetch her pony so she could leave, but Hareton cursed her out and refused. Cathy, who had never been spoken to this way her entire life, was genuinely shocked and offended by this. Then Zila revealed that Hareton was not just a servant, but also her cousin. The idea that this illiterate brute was her cousin hurt her so much, she could hardly believe it. She came to Nellie begging to tell her it wasn't so, but Nellie had to confirm her worst nightmare. Just imagine being Hareton, seeing a girl genuinely saddened by knowing that she was related to you. Hurts just in the fifi. But Hareton, seeing Cathy hurt and crying, went to the farm and fetched her pony along with a little puppy, hoping to cheer her up. But she refused and just took her pony and Nellie to leave Wuthering Heights at once. A little later, Edgar returned with Linton, the son of Isabella and Heathcliff. Now that Isabella had passed away, Linton had no home to call his own, so Edgar took him in. Cathy, who was still upset that she had a cousin like Hareton, was excited to meet what she called her real cousin. Linton was a very delicate and weak boy, a child used to pampering and the finest things in life, the total opposite of his father. But there is one thing that both Heathcliff and Linton share, being the most evil people of all time. You know, after reading this book many times, I've been thinking about who I dislike more, Linton or Heathcliff. Even though Heathcliff did more damage and was technically the worst person overall, I've never never gotten angrier at a character than I did at Linton. He's the most pathetic piece of dog water I've ever seen in human form. But let me calm down, I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, we're supposed to like this dude. Kathy was absolutely fascinated by him and showered him with kisses. Seeing how happy Linton made Kathy, Nellie and Edgar were worried about what Heathcliff would do now that Linton was here. However, they didn't have to wonder long. For that very same night, Joseph came knocking in Heathcliff's stead, saying that his actual father was calling him back to his rightful home, back to Wuthering Heights. Isabella's dying wish was for her son to never go to Wuthering Heights and experience Heathcliff, but there was nothing Edgar could do. It really was Heathcliff's right to take his son home, and finally he relented, telling Joseph that he would send Linton tomorrow at dawn before Kathy realized he was gone. Linton was unhappy to hear that he had to go to Wuthering Heights. He liked this place already and didn't wanna go. Oh my god, I hate this guy. It's not all spoiled brat behavior either. He did ask some extremely valid questions, like why Isabella never talked to him about Heathcliff or told him that he ever had a father in the first place. Nellie, in an attempt to get him out of there, told him that his father always wanted to visit his mother in London but was simply too busy. But now, alas that she's dead, he could finally spend some time with his son. This somehow worked on Linton's stupid brain and he got dressed and rode across the moor to Wuthering Heights. When Linton got to Wuthering Heights, we are actually given like a comedic scene where Heathcliff finally sees his son. Heathcliff was not happy or excited but genuinely disappointed at how wimpy he looked, saying that Linton had barely any traces of Heathcliff in him. Joseph and Heathcliff basically took turns bullying the little guy. Heathcliff even saying that he looked like a pureling chicken. But being who he is, Heathcliff would probably find a way to use even him. Turning to Nellie, Heathcliff promises her that he will be kind to Linton and probably won't even abuse him. Edgar had told Kathy that Linton had to go to a faraway place, knowing that if he told her that Linton was only living a few miles down from her, she would go to Wuthering Heights right into the nasty hands of Heathcliff. A few days later, Nellie talked to Zila when they met each other at Gimmerton. Heathcliff, to no one's surprise, had been not been taking care of Linton well. Who knew? Like, Zila even claims that Heathcliff hates him, but would hate him even more if he just realized how pampered he truly was. In fact, he's so used to comfort that Nellie came to the conclusion that Linton lacked sympathy and was just selfish. Nellie is really smart. Skipping ahead a little in time, Kathy was now 16. She decided to be a little rebellious and go wandering into the moors when Edgar wasn't watching. There, she saw Hareton again with a tall, dark gentleman. Heathcliff. Heathcliff then called Kathy to Wuthering Heights, smiling, telling her that even though she didn't know him, she knew his son, Linton. And this was enough to make Kathy go with him. You have to realize that Edgar never warned Kathy about Heathcliff. In fact, he never wanted to tell her about his existence at all, wanting to shelter his daughter from the monster that is Heathcliff. Ironically, this good intention is what got her into Wuthering Heights. Kathy asked Heathcliff why her father never mentioned him. He told her that her father thought he was too poor to marry his sister, and that he didn't consent to the marriage at all. Kathy, being a good person and thinking Heathcliff to be the same, thought this was sad and disagreed with her father. At Wuthering Heights, Kathy and Linton were reunited, and she was surprised at how close they really lived to each other. She also realized that Heathcliff is her uncle in technically, in a weird way. The first question that Kathy asked Heathcliff when she realized this was if Hareton was truly his cousin or not. Hareton is pissed. To put salt on the wound, she went to Heathcliff and whispered something about Hareton, making fun of him right in front of Hareton while he was just standing there. Hareton immediately realized that it was about his education and was obviously hurt. Hareton's education had degraded over the years and now he couldn't even read or write. He could barely even speak. Kathy then asked Heathcliff if she could visit often and Heathcliff obviously said yes. Nellie was there watching all this quietly, trying to get Kathy away from the place as fast as possible, but when she saw Heathcliff, she knew that she had no hope. She then shifted her focus to Hareton. Seeing the little boy she raised like this deeply saddened Nellie. Heathcliff then came to Nellie and whispered in her ear that he enjoyed seeing Hareton like this. Degraded, stupid, uneducated, a brute just like he was. Heathcliff also said something that I find absolutely fascinating. "I've had a pleasure in him," he continued, reflecting aloud. "He has satisfied my expectations. If he were a born fool, I should not enjoy it half so much. But he is no fool, and I can sympathize with all his feelings, having felt them myself. I know what he suffers now, for instance, exactly. It is merely a beginning of what he shall suffer, though.
and he'll never be able to emerge from its bathos of coarseness and ignorance. I've got him faster than his scoundrel of a father secured me, and lower, for he takes a pride in his brutishness. I've taught him to scorn everything extra animal as silly and weak. Don't you think Henleek would be proud of his son if he could see him?
Heathcliff knows Hareton's true nature is kind and gentle, which is why he finds so much pleasure in ruining him. Instead of growing past Hindley, Heathcliff became Hindley. But unlike Hindley, there is one more thing that makes Hareton's situation so much worse.
And the best of it is, Hareton is damnably fond of me. You'll own that I've outmatched Hindley there. If the dead villain could rise from his grave and abuse me for his offspring's wrongs, I should have the fun of seeing the offspring fight him back again, indignant that he should dare to rail at the one friend he has in the world.
After isolating Hareton so much, the only friend he had in the world was Heathcliff, and Hareton without a doubt loved Heathcliff like a father. Heathcliff admitted that Hareton was a better man than Linton, basically saying that if Hareton was anybody else's son, he would have loved him. This, in my opinion, is the single most evil thing Heathcliff has ever done, because it shows Heathcliff is capable of love, but his thirst for revenge takes precedence over it. In the distance, Nellie saw Linton and Kathy making fun of Hareton, calling him names, talking behind his back about his intelligence and the fact that he could not read. While Kathy was joking around, Linton really poured out all his malice in these insults. Like, man, it's like Linton is only docile because he does not have the power to do anything else. And if he did have the power, he would be like the worst person of all time. Foreshadowing his literary device, Nellie then looked at Heathcliff's face and saw genuine disgust for Kathy and Linton's behavior. Nellie understood, not really liking Linton either. Even though he was pampered, he truly did belong at Wuthering Heights. After Kathy returned to Thrushcross Grange, she got into a fight with Edgar and questioned why he lied about Linton and Wuthering Heights. Edgar, realizing how colossally he had messed up by not warning her, told her about Heathcliff. Listen to the way Edgar describes him.
Miss Kathy, conversant with no bad deeds except her own slight acts of disobedience, injustice, and passion arising from hot temper and thoughtlessness, and repented of on the day they were committed, was amazed at the blackness of spirit that could brood on and cover revenge for years, and deliberately prosecute its plans without a visitation of remorse. She appeared so deeply impressed and shocked at this new view of human nature, excluded from all her studies and all her ideas till now, that Mr. Edgar deemed it unnecessary to pursue the subject. He merely added, "You will know hereafter, darling, why I wish you to avoid his house and family. Now return to your old employments and amusements and think no more about them."
I think Edgar has the most unfiltered view of Heathcliff in this entire book. Catherine, hearing this, kissed her father on the forehead and promised never to talk to anyone from Wuthering Heights and never to return there. A little while later, Nellie saw Kathy writing letters. When Nellie inquired who she was writing letters to, Kathy said that she couldn't help falling in love with Linton. But before she could even complete the sentence, Nellie was looking at her like this, and she made her burn all the letters immediately. One cloudy day in October, Nellie and Kathy went for a walk in the moors. Edgar had been sick lately, and they discussed the possibility of him passing away, which for obvious reasons distressed Kathy. Nellie said that if he's so sick, she shouldn't do anything to worry him, like, go to Wuthering Heights or talk to a wimpy piece of human garbage. Kathy swore that she wouldn't. She had stopped writing to Linton for some time now, and Nellie made sure that they won't go too far into the moors lest they saw Heathcliff's figure standing in the distance. Kathy then sees a beautiful flower and climbed the wall to get it. It was right at the edge of the property and the door wouldn't budge, so Kathy jumped on the other side of the wall to get it. She then heard someone approaching. Heathcliff. Nellie started panicking, unable to open the door and get to Kathy. Kathy told Heathcliff that she wouldn't speak to him and that her father had told her that he's a wicked man. Heathcliff told her that he wasn't here to do anything, only to inform her that Linton was dying from a broken heart because Kathy wasn't writing to him anymore. Nellie finally burst through the door and called Heathcliff a liar. Heathcliff, however, just repeated himself. Linton is dying and he is in need of kindness. And then he left. But while coming back to Thrushcross Grange, Nellie caught a cold. It got worse and she had to rest for 3 weeks while Kathy took care of her. Kathy was dutiful and skipped meals and studies to take care of her like a faithful nurse. But at 6 p.m. without fail, she left the room. I wonder where she's going to. Wuthering Heights, it's Wuthering Heights. Nellie soon discovered that she was sneaking out to meet Linton. She did this by bribing the stable boy with her books. Nellie then went outside and caught Kathy returning from her trip. When Nellie confronted her, Kathy confessed to everything. She also told her how the visits went. At first, everything went fine, but one day, Hatton tried to impress her by reading his own name. He had snuck books in and started learning all by himself. But Kathy laughed at him because he didn't know his numbers yet, calling him a dunce. Then she went to visit Linton in the other room. While they were chatting, Hatton burst through the door, grabbed Linton and threw him on the floor. Then he pushed Catherine and him into the kitchen and locked them there. Linton, up until this point, has been bratty and manipulative but never truly expressed violence. A first-time reader might even confuse him for just an annoying character. But here, choking on his own blood, this is what he said.
"If you don't let me in, I'll kill you. If you don't let me in, I'll kill you," he rather shrieked than said. "Devil, devil, I'll kill you. I'll kill you."
When Linton said this, Joseph started smiling, saying that Linton was finally showing a bit of his father's blood. Kathy then backed away, terrified of this new hatred she saw in Linton. Seeing Linton pass out, choking on his own blood, she called for Zila. But by the time they arrived, Hatton was already carrying Linton up to his room. Kathy then left with her pony immediately. Hatton ran after her, not to attack, but to apologize. But Kathy whipped him, and while Hatton howled in pain, Kathy escaped. That's how she got back here. She begged Nellie not to tell Edgar, saying that she wanted to spend more time with Linton because he was obviously sick. Nellie said that she would consider not telling Edgar, but then immediately goes and tells Edgar. Edgar then banned Kathy from ever visiting Wuthering Heights. Nellie again took a break from her story to talk to Lockwood. Seeing that Lockwood was clearly interested in the widowed Kathy from the present, she asked him to consider courting her. Lockwood didn't need to hear all that though, he was already considering it either way. Then Nellie continued her story. Taking place a little less than a year ago, it was now confirmed that Edgar was well and truly dying. Knowing this, he was worried that he would leave Kathy with nothing. There had been tons of suspiciously well-written letters from Linton asking for Kathy's hand in marriage. Edgar, being quite desperate now, considered it. Being a woman in that time, she needed to marry Linton to live permanently at Thrushcross Grange because Linton was the male heir of the family. But Edgar would rather die than let her go to Wuthering Heights again. So he told her that Nellie would accompany her when she went to visit Linton in between both of their houses on the moors. Kathy and Nellie set out on horseback to meet Linton halfway but didn't see him. Nellie thought it was a trap and tried to persuade her to leave, but then in the distance they saw a figure on the ground crawling his way towards them. They realized that this was Linton. He was so ill that he had only made it a quarter mile from Wuthering Heights. Since we had last seen him, he had become thinner and paler and more ill in every way. But he insisted that he was getting better than last time. When Kathy went to him, he was weirdly aggressive and just laid there on the grass saying that the day was splendid. But everyone there knew it was just an excuse for him not to move anymore. Kathy then tried to talk to Linton, the whole purpose of this visit, but Linton didn't seem to care. It soon became very clear that the only reason Linton was saying that he was healthy here is because if he didn't, Heathcliff would do something to him. Linton even told Kathy that she should come next week too, as promised, and that if she were, by very unfortunate circumstances, to encounter his father Heathcliff, she should tell him that he's been very talkative and friendly. Since Linton couldn't walk, Kathy went to fetch berries with Nellie to give to him. But when they returned, he was already knocked out. Kathy asked Nellie if they could just go and not stay here any longer. But Linton suddenly woke up and told her to hush, because in the distance, the unmistakable dark figure of Heathcliff was approaching. Seeing him, Nellie and Kathy rushed back to Thrushcross Grange. A little more time had passed and Edgar's condition had gotten worse. But Kathy was always at his side. It was another day where she had to meet Linton, but she didn't want to go anymore. Every time she had met with Linton, it was the same story. He would beg her to stay until Heathcliff approached from the distance. It's like Linton was not there to meet with Kathy, but just to be bait. Which, let's be real, Heathcliff is the type of dude to use his son as bait. But Edgar, to her dismay, urged her to go. It was not only because he wanted her to live at Thrushcross Grange, but also because he wanted to know that she wouldn't be alone in the world after he's gone. I think it's clear that Edgar remembered the petite, high-class little boy from all those years ago, seeing a lot of himself in Linton, but there is an ocean of difference between them. Edgar, however gentle, stood on business when it mattered most, but Linton is not Edgar. Nellie thinks those letters that Linton has been sending, pining after Kathy and claiming that he will treat her fairly, are just words on paper and not hinting at his true character. And who's to say that he even wrote them? It's just as likely that Heathcliff wrote them, telling Edgar what he wants to hear. It's a horrible thought to think, but something Heathcliff would definitely do. When they arrived at the spot, Linton was already there on the ground. She asked him to tell the truth. Does he even love her, or is he just pretending? But then we notice that Linton is terrified, and he wouldn't say why. The only thing he would say is that if Kathy leaves him, he would be killed. Not die from heartbreak or anything like that, but actually killed. This is the only time in the story that any character admits that Heathcliff is actually capable of murder and not just mysterious and unfortunate deaths at his place of residence. Linton then got onto his knees and groveled, pulling at her skirt, begging her to consent to marry him. But Kathy was now genuinely terrified. She didn't even know what he was talking about. So she asked him this question.
You wouldn't hurt me, Linton, would you? You wouldn't let anyone hurt me if you could prevent it? I'll believe you are a coward for yourself, but not a cowardly betrayer of your best friend.
Linton did not respond, only repeating that his father would kill him. Do you guys see why I hate Linton now? Is your sympathy for him waning yet? Don't worry, it gets much worse like everything else in this book. Like clockwork, they heard him approach. Heathcliff came down from the heights, his eyes only on Nellie. He smiled and told her that it was nice to see her next to Wuthering Heights again, just for old time's sake. Then Heathcliff said that since Linton was so sick, they should go back to Wuthering Heights, and Linton couldn't walk, so somebody should help carry him. When Nellie and Kathy refused, this happened.
I know that, but you will force me to pinch the baby and make it scream before it moves your charity. Come then, my hero, are you willing to return escorted by me? He approached once more, and made as if he would seize the fragile being, but shrinking back, Linton clung to his cousin and implored her to accompany him with a frantic importunity that admitted no denial.
Whatever unspeakable things Heathcliff did to Linton, it clearly did a number on him. He was so terrified that he actually flinched when Heathcliff, his own father, came to touch him. Kathy couldn't take it anymore and accepted his invitation to Wuthering Heights. When they entered Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff shut the door and locked them inside. Heathcliff had the key in his hand, and Kathy, knowing that her father was dying and needed to know that she was safe, jumped on Heathcliff, trying to wrestle the key away. But he grabbed the girl and started beating her relentlessly. Nellie rushed in, but Heathcliff just pushed her back and she fell down. Oh, and where was Linton during this whole exchange?
Her cousin had shrunk into a corner of the settle, as quiet as a mouse, congratulating himself, I dare say, that the correction had alighted on another than him.
But we are not done yet. When Nellie and Kathy beg Linton to tell what Heathcliff's plan is, he says this.
Give me some tea, I'm thirsty, then I'll tell you, he answered. Miss Dean, go away, I don't like you standing over me. Now, Catherine, you're letting your tears fall into my cup. I don't like that. Give me another.
Linton then told them that the plan was to have them married before Edgar died, so Linton, being the only male heir, would inherit Thrushcross Grange. When Heathcliff returned, Kathy begged him to let her go home, telling him that her father was dying and to please have some sympathy. Kathy then said that she was not afraid and she would marry Linton, but please just let her go home and see her father first. Heathcliff, seeing this display of true courage and love for her father, of course does not let her go home and locks her and Nellie in a room. Nellie struggled and tried to get out, but the door wouldn't budge. Early next morning, Kathy was taken away from the room, but Nellie had to stay. She was periodically given food by Hareton. Nellie asked him to let her go, but Hareton was faithful to Heathcliff. He didn't let her go, and she was held prisoner there for 5 nights. When Nellie was eventually freed, she immediately looked for Kathy, just to see Linton sitting in the middle of the room, sucking on candy. This is the scene that, in my opinion, made Linton go from one of the most hateable characters in the book to the single most hateable character in the book. Linton told her that Kathy was locked in her room, that it was his right to keep her there. She's his wife, isn't she? It's a shame that she should even wish to leave him. The only reason he's not in his room right now with Kathy is because he can't bear her constant crying. Linton then says the only reason Kathy even married Linton was for his money. This is the moment that shows Linton for who he really is. He's a person who lacks empathy. As long as he's comfortable, he doesn't care what happens to anyone. His sloth transcends any love that he had for his wife. Knowing that he would die soon, he sold his wife for a chair and a piece of candy. Linton then said that he would never let her leave, that all her nice books, her birds, even the pony that she rode were his. Apparently, Kathy had offered all of this in exchange to see her father. She even offered her locket with the picture of her father, but Linton told her that that too was his and stole it from her neck. Kathy then fought back and pushed Linton, but she heard Heathcliff coming. There were 2 portraits of her parents with her. She gave her mother's to Linton and tried to hide her father's away, but Heathcliff found it and crushed it under his foot. Linton said that he didn't like to see when Heathcliff hit anything, whether it be a dog or horse or a human. When Heathcliff hit Kathy, he closed his eyes. He told Nellie that he was glad that Kathy was hit though, because she deserved to be punished. But the blood that was dripping from her face made him uncomfortable and he didn't like it, so he came here. Nellie was horrified. She reminded him of how kind Kathy was, that even through all this, she still took care of Linton, but he did not care. Nellie called him heartless and rushed back to Thrushcross Grange and sent people to Wuthering Heights to get Kathy back. Nellie told Edgar the story, softening it just a bit so he didn't freak out that his daughter was getting beaten up at Wuthering Heights on a daily basis. Hearing this, Edgar called Mr. Green, his lawyer, to change his will. But not knowing how ill Linton was, he didn't change it much. After some time, the people who went out looking for Kathy came back without her. Heathcliff had told them that she was not there, and to his credit, they couldn't even find evidence that she ever was there. But the next morning, Kathy showed up to Thrushcross Grange, having somehow sneaked out. She went to Edgar. It was clear that he was going to be dead very soon. So Kathy, instead of telling him how much pain and suffering she went through at Wuthering Heights, told her father nothing and simply stayed with him. So Edgar passed away peacefully. Just as they were grieving, Mr. Green, Edgar's lawyer who just changed his will, came back and fired all the employees except for Nellie. It is then revealed that Mr. Green has been working for Heathcliff all along, and the change in the will was probably part of Heathcliff's plan. So now that Edgar was dead, Thrushcross Grange was Linton's. In a moment of humanity, Heathcliff lets Kathy stay at Thrushcross Grange until after the funeral. The night after the funeral ended, Heathcliff appeared at Thrushcross Grange to bring Kathy back. Nellie asked why Linton and Kathy couldn't just stay here. It was a much better place for a young couple than Wuthering Heights. But Heathcliff said that he was going to rent it to a tenant. Before Nellie could get herself in more trouble, Kathy agreed to go back to Wuthering Heights, saying that Linton was the only thing left in the world that she loved now. Heathcliff made fun of her, saying that she was a champion for this attitude, and said that if Linton were as strong as Heathcliff, he would treat her even worse than he did. Kathy knew this, saying that she knew Linton had a bad nature, but at least there are moments where it seemed like Linton actually loves her, whereas Heathcliff had nobody in the world who loved him. Kathy then goes to pack her things. Heathcliff then told Nellie that when they were digging Edgar's grave, he had bribed the gravedigger to uncover Catherine's coffin. And when Heathcliff looked inside, he said that it was still her, that her body hadn't decomposed. Now, we have no idea if this is the insanity of Heathcliff speaking or an actual supernatural phenomenon. We all should know by now that Heathcliff is a little bit kooky in the head. But the reason he stopped digging Catherine's grave was because Catherine whispered to him, asking him to stop. He told Nellie that he could feel her presence with him, and that presence had been haunting him for 18 years. Kathy then came back, ready to leave. And as she went out of Thrushcross Grange, Heathcliff finished his conversation with Nellie by warning her to never visit Wuthering Heights. This is where Nellie's tale to Lockwood ends. From then on, she had been here at Thrushcross Grange, taking care of the place in preparation for the tenant that Heathcliff was supposedly going to bring. Lockwood, having fully recovered now, went to visit Wuthering Heights again in hopes of courting Kathy and taking her away from that place. This is where he met Zila, who told her about the first days of Kathy's stay at Wuthering Heights. She told him that the first thing Kathy did when she came home to Wuthering Heights was to go check up on Linton to see if he was doing okay. I truly don't know why Kathy still loves Linton or takes care of him, but she's a much better person than me. Linton was now at death's door and she requested a doctor for him. Heathcliff told her that he won't spend any more money on Linton and that
none here care what becomes of him. If you do, act the nurse. If you do not, lock him up and leave him.
I mean, it's not as if like Heathcliff actually cares. Heathcliff probably sees Linton as Isabella's replacement, taking out all his anger toward her on her son. It didn't matter that Linton was also Heathcliff's son. Cathy, understanding how powerless she was, did as he asked and faithfully nursed Linton. She asked everyone in the house, Hareton, Zela, even Joseph, for help, but they all refused. Heathcliff had told him not to help, and nobody disobeyed Heathcliff. Zela then says that even though she thought it was wrong to just let Linton die, it didn't seem like her problem, so why should she care? This is a pretty callous line, but it perfectly represents Wuthering Heights. It's the callousness of people that allowed Heathcliff to exist, and the indifference to others that let him thrive. After a little while, Linton died, and Cathy just sat there, silent and exhausted. Heathcliff didn't even appear to care. In fact, the first words out of his mouth to Cathy were,
"Now, Catherine," he said, "how do you feel?" She was dumb. "How do you feel, Catherine?" he repeated. "He's safe and I'm free," she answered. "I should feel well, but," she continued with a bitterness she couldn't conceal, "but you have left me so long to struggle against death alone that I feel and see only death. I feel like death."
Heathcliff then left the room, allowing her to grieve. This may seem kind at first, but remember, Heathcliff was like venom. He chose the worst torture tailored to that specific person. The isolation after the death of Linton was Cathy's torture, and it worked. When she emerged from her room, she had become bitter and angry, turning into the hateful young woman from the prologue of the story. Heathcliff had gotten the worst part of her to show. She too now fit in Wuthering Heights. Right before Linton's death, Heathcliff had coaxed Linton into agreeing to give all his property to his father. Heathcliff did this during the 1 week that Cathy was away during her father's funeral. So letting Cathy stay at Thrushcross Grange was not an act of kindness, but simply to make Linton give everything up. When Lockwood came to Nellie to tell her how Cathy was, she thought about renting a small cottage for Cathy to live peacefully in. But Nellie knew that this was a pipe dream because Heathcliff wouldn't let Cathy go. Cathy was like a trophy to him, proof that he had gotten his revenge. Lockwood then tells us that he is going back to London, but before he did, he wanted to visit Wuthering Heights once more. At Wuthering Heights, Lockwood came to tell Heathcliff that he was going back to London for a while, but he had also come for another reason: to sneak in a letter from Nellie to Cathy. He waited at the gate for a while, reminding him of his second visit to Wuthering Heights, but Hareton eventually lets him in. Cathy was in the kitchen, and Lockwood says that she has grown less spirited than when he last saw her. It seemed like Wuthering Heights had sunk deep into her soul like a cancer. Lockwood carefully dropped the letter onto Cathy's lap, but Cathy asked what that was loud enough that Hareton heard it. Lockwood admitted that it was a letter from Nellie, annoyed that his sneakiness was all for nothing. Cathy's face then brightened, and just as she was about to take the letter, Hareton snatched it away from her, confiscating it, telling her that Heathcliff should read it first. Cathy then started silently weeping, turning her face away from them. Hareton softened up and, going against his nature, gave the letter back. Lockwood asked if Cathy could write a letter to Nellie, but she said that she had no materials for writing, not even a book. See, Cathy loved reading, and since Heathcliff never read, he thought it would be better to just burn all the books. She was desperate enough to go through Joseph's religious texts, and once even found a stack of books with Hareton, who had been studying in his spare time. Hareton tries to deny the accusation, but Cathy told him how she heard him reading aloud and mispronouncing every word. Lockwood, genuinely surprised at how cruelly Cathy was making fun of Hareton, tried to step in and defend him, saying that he'll be a scholar in the future. But Cathy didn't relent, telling Hareton that him reading those books debased them. Hareton then suddenly stood up. He had been taught to respond with violence, and he was thirsting to do so, but he suppressed his anger and gave Cathy his secret stash of books. Cathy, probably knowing that it was no use, Heathcliff would find it and burn them anyway, told Hareton, "I won't have them now," she answered. "I shall connect them with you and hate them." This was the final straw. Lockwood exited the room and heard Hareton slap Cathy. He then took all the books that he had been studying and threw them into the fire, while Cathy yelled that burning the books was the only thing a brute like him could gain from them. More than any scene in the novel, this was the one that saddened me. Two good people reduced to this, trying to hurt each other at the cost of their own future. Cathy could have used those books to write to Nellie, and Hareton could have used them to learn. But no, they thought it was better to hurt each other than to rise up and collaborate. Hareton then went outside, and Cathy went back to the kitchen, hearing their master approach. Lockwood and Heathcliff talked about a rental agreement, but Heathcliff was suspicious. He told Lockwood that he wouldn't get out of paying the full year's rent for Thrushcross Grange, and as one of the final lines of Heathcliff to Lockwood, he said, "I never relent in exacting my due from anyone." Lockwood now knew how accurate that statement was and agreed to pay the full year's rent. During dinner, right before Lockwood was about to leave, he was still trying to court Kathy for some reason, but she wouldn't have dinner with him. And Lockwood chalked it up to her not being able to appreciate a better class of people like himself, missing the irony that she was the better class of people just a few years back. This is why I love Lockwood. He's so blind to his own errors while curious about the follies of Wuthering Heights. It'll never tire me how pretentious this dude is. When Lockwood finally left Wuthering Heights for the moors, he said the most delusional sentence in the novel.
What a realization of something more romantic than a fairy tale it would have been for Miss Linton Heathcliff, had she and I struck up an attachment, as her own good nurse desired, and migrated together into a stirring atmosphere of the town.
Even after hearing Nellie describe the horrors of Wuthering Heights, how this almost fairy tale romance of Heathcliff and Catherine turned into this horrific story of vengeance, he still imagined a fairy tale romance between him and the traumatized widowed orphan. This is why Lockwood, even though he appears so few times in the novel, is one of the most interesting characters in Wuthering Heights. It's because he represents the people who will never truly see how destructive love can be and only see it as a good thing. In fact, in phase 2 of the story, right as Isabella left for Thrushcross Grange for Heathcliff, he said this line which perfectly wraps up the theme of this book.
She abandoned them under a delusion, he answered, picturing in me a hero of romance and expecting unlimited indulgences from my chivalrous devotion. I can hardly regard her in the same light of a rational creature. So obstinately has she persisted in forming a fabulous notion of my character and acting on the false impressions she cherished.
The fantasy of the romantic hero is a lie. It's a facade for people like Heathcliff to take over. It shows you how subscribing to that ideal will only lead to misery. I mean, Heathcliff got everything that he ever wanted and got revenge for every single perceived slight. He burned 2 families to the ground in the process, but it didn't matter to Heathcliff because he won. And now nobody is there to stop him. But this isn't the end of Wuthering Heights. A year later, Lockwood pays a visit to Wuthering Heights to pay the rest of his bill. When he goes to Thrushcross Grange, Nellie isn't there anymore. The servant there calls her Mistress Ellen Dean and tells Lockwood that she now works at Wuthering Heights. When he arrives at Wuthering Heights expecting the gate to be locked, he's surprised to find it unlocked. He enters to see Hareton unlike he has ever seen him, well dressed, looking like a gentleman, and Kathy looking like a lady. Kathy was teaching Hareton how to read philosophy, and Lockwood becomes extremely jealous of them. Not only because they are happy, but also because they managed to maintain their love and one of them didn't flee like he did. Then he sees Nellie inside. Nellie tells Lockwood that Kathy is now the owner of Thrushcross Grange and that he should pay her. Lockwood is confused. Where is Heathcliff? But Nellie says he died 3 months earlier and Kathy and Hareton have become engaged. Nellie also says that she was wrong to suggest that Lockwood should have pursued her and that the only thing that she now wishes for is for Hareton and Kathy to get married. Nellie then tells the story of how Heathcliff died. It was just another miserable day in Wuthering Heights. Kathy and Hareton, both hating Joseph, teamed up and ripped up his trees to make a flower garden. From then on, they both formed an allegiance. Joseph said that Kathy had cast a spell on Hareton and twisted his mind. Kathy then turned to Hareton and asked if Heathcliff were here, would Hareton let him strike her? Mirroring the question that she asked Linton. But unlike that spine-deficient little troglodyte, Hareton said that he wouldn't let Heathcliff strike her. Heathcliff then came home to see this. It was not Joseph's yelling that disturbed him, but when he saw that Hareton and Kathy were happy together. They were no longer enemies. This deeply angered him. Years of manipulation gone in a few minutes just like that. Heathcliff then yelled at them and grabbed Kathy by the hair. But Hareton then stood up against Heathcliff and begged him not to hurt her. Just this one time. Heathcliff's eyes flashed. He looked like he was going to rip Kathy apart into pieces. But then he released her. The next night at dinner, Heathcliff signaled for Kathy and Hareton to leave, leaving only Nellie and him at the table. Heathcliff then asked Nellie this.
It is a poor conclusion, is it not?
After a moment, he delivers this line.
An absurd termination of my violent exertions. I get levers and mattocks to demolish the 2 houses and train myself to be capable of working like Hercules, and when everything is ready and in my power, I find the will to lift a slate of either roof has vanished. My old enemies have not beaten me. Now would be the precise time to revenge myself on their representatives. I could do it, and none could hinder me. But where is the use? I don't care for striking. I can't take the trouble to raise my hand. That sounds as if I'd been laboring the whole time only to exhibit a final trait of magnanimity. It is far from being the case. I've lost the faculty of enjoying their destruction, and I'm too idle to destroy for nothing.
Just like how Heathcliff designs punishments tailored to others, he had tailored his own worst torture. The ability to do everything, but the will to do nothing. Heathcliff then told Nellie that he had changed. When Nellie asked how, he said that he felt strange.
5 minutes ago, Hatton seemed a personification of my youth, not a human being. I felt to him in such a variety of ways that it would have been impossible to have accosted him rationally.
I believe the condition that Heathcliff is experiencing right now is called empathy. Even though Heathcliff had deprived him of an education and made him a brute, he still saw himself in Hatton. Hatton is a Heathcliff who was kinder while just as strong, the Heathcliff that should have been. And it's clear that Heathcliff actually loved Hatton, but had subdued that love for the sake of revenge. But now that he had gotten it, that love was the only thing that remained.
Hatton's aspect was the ghost of my immortal love, of my wild endeavors to hold my right, my degradation, my pride, my happiness, and my anguish.
Nellie asked if Heathcliff was afraid of dying, but Heathcliff said that death was the only thing he yearned for. Later, Heathcliff was affected by a strange sickness. It seemed as if he was omnipotent and knew strange things now. The same signs that Catherine showed 18 years ago, just before she was about to die. He didn't eat and wandered out at strange hours, but he was happy. Nellie asked him why, and he said that he was at the threshold of heaven. She found this strange, but then Nellie had a strange vision. She saw Heathcliff's grave. Hatton tried to talk to Heathcliff, expecting the generally harsh words that were oh so common with Heathcliff, but to his surprise, Heathcliff said the strangest thing of all. Heathcliff told Hatton to go to Cathy. He asked why he would want anybody else's company. In his final hours, Heathcliff actually accepted that Hatton was like him, and he gave him the opportunity that Heathcliff never got: permission to love. Nellie also spotted Heathcliff talking to himself, saying that he would be there soon enough and other cryptic things. Even after all that Heathcliff had done to Nellie, she still didn't want to see him suffer in the afterlife and asked if she should call someone to read the Bible to him. But Heathcliff said that he had no need for that. He wasn't going to heaven, he was going to his own personal heaven, and the other heaven would be uncoveted by him. Then one morning, Nellie observed that Heathcliff was sleeping in. She went to check on him and found him lying still, dead. The window was open and rain was falling onto his corpse. But his face did not have the beautiful stillness of Catherine's. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was frozen in an ugly grin, and his eyes were wide open, staring for eternity into the sky. Hareton came into the room and crumbled seeing his corpse. He wept and grieved him, kissing his face. Heathcliff was the only father Hareton ever had, and yes, he had taken his education and his status, but other than Catherine, Hareton was the only soul that Heathcliff had shown genuine love to. And I can only imagine how much more it hurt for Hareton to know that in his final moments, Heathcliff had shown him genuine fatherly affection. After the small funeral of Heathcliff, Wuthering Heights was well and truly healing. The gates that were always locked were now open. Nellie told Lockwood, however, that if he goes late at night into the moors, you can see two apparitions wandering the area, happy and in love. Lockwood, hearing this, walked out of Wuthering Heights and saw three graves together: Edgar's, Catherine's, and Heathcliff's, all lying next to each other. Lockwood then looked up to the sky, and in the evening light, he watched the moths and felt the sun. Now that he was thinking about it, Wuthering Heights was quite a beautiful place. The final words in the novel are Lockwood thinking that he couldn't think of a better place for them to sleep than at Wuthering Heights. This nihilistic, brutal novel has one of the most beautiful endings I've ever seen. The curse of Wuthering Heights has finally been lifted, and there can actually be peace. Emily Bronte did not live long after the publication of this novel. 1 year after her only novel was published, she died. At the time, this book was mocked and hated by the critics. I can only imagine how happily Emily Bronte would be right now, knowing that her novel is praised as the greatest Gothic novel of all time. A story that has touched the hearts of millions, including mine. It would have been so easy for Emily Bronte to end this book on a nihilistic note. But she showed that even a story like this can have a happy ending. That your nurture is not all you are, and you can become greater than what other people have made you. I think more than anything, that is why I love this book. This is the real Wuthering Heights. Thank you for watching and have a beautiful day.